Well, I hope you're doing all right. Today, we're going to look at a topic for the next 4 weeks. We're going to look at faith. In fact, we've entitled this sermon, Without Faith, It's Impossible, this sermon series. So the next 4 weeks, we're going to unpack this issue of faith. There's a lot of just be honest, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there under the banner of faith. First of all, there's the secular kind of definitions of faith. Do you know that Webster's has 17 different definitions of faith? And then whenever you get inside the church, that's where it really gets wacky sometimes. There are people who say, man, if you have enough faith, you can just do anything. And what they really mean is that if you have enough faith, you can manipulate God. If you have enough faith, you can name and claim it. Now, Jesus did say stuff like, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could make a mountain move. What's that about, right? And we're going to look at this over the next 4 weeks and get a biblical perspective of faith. And even when we understand what faith is biblically, sometimes we know it, but we're not living in it and we're not walking in it. And so it's important that we understand faith, what biblical faith is and what it looks like in our lives. In fact, in your notes, let's talk real quick about how important it is to really understand biblical faith. In your notes, first of all, without faith, it's impossible to know God. Now, that's pretty important, right? That if we don't understand faith, then we can't really even know God. Why? Well, Ephesians 2:8-9, for it's by grace that you've been saved through what? Through faith, and this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Don't miss this. You are saved by grace. I'm going to push that as much as I can. Grace, unmerited favor, grace, a good acrostic, God's riches at Christ's expense. What Jesus went through on the cross, paid the penalty for our sins, and we can know God by faith through grace. The reason I'm going to push that is because many of us grew up in traditions where salvation was defined in other ways. In fact, salvation was defined in these ways. You've been baptized or you've joined a church. I mean, I can remember growing up, and even though it was never said exactly this way, kind of what was the implication was if you came to church on Sunday morning, you were a spiritual seeker. If you came on Sunday night, you were probably saved. If you came on Wednesday night, you were a saint. I mean, anybody grew up in those traditions, right? And so we've got to be able to break that mold to understand it's not about church attendance. It's not about being baptized. That the only way that we can be saved is by faith through God's grace. So it's important for us to understand what faith is because you can't know God without faith. Secondly, you can't please God without faith. In your Bibles, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Now, I ask you to turn to Hebrews chapter 11. I want to read the first 6 verses, and your homework is to read the rest of chapter 11 this week as we look at faith. But look at what it says in Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is being certain of what we hope for, being sure of what we hope for, and certain of what we do not see. We're going to unpack that a little bit more in just a minute. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. Wouldn't that be an awesome way to go? I mean, you're out, in the woods just talking to God, praying one day, and God goes, you know what? Come on up. I mean, let's just skip that whole burial and all of that. Just come on up. That would be a great way to go. That's the way Enoch went. And he goes on to say that before he was taken, he was commended as one who what? We got to get better than that. The verse 5, for before he was taken, he was commended as one who did what? Please God. That's key. Why? Because of the next verse. The next verse says, and without faith, it's impossible to do what? Please God. So how did Enoch please God? He walked in faith. And God's commending Enoch for being a man of faith and walking in faith because that pleased God. And then verse 6, and without faith it's impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Verse 6 may be the most essential verse about faith in the Bible because what it teaches, I can be an incredibly moral person, but without faith I'm not pleasing God. I could sell everything I own, give it to the poor, but without faith, I'm not pleasing God. I could be in church every week and have perfect attendance, get baptized a dozen times, but without faith, it's not pleasing to God. So, if without faith it's impossible to know God, and without faith it's impossible to please God, it's pretty important for us to understand what biblical faith is. So let's start this week, and we'll be doing this for all 4 weeks, unpacking a definition of what biblical faith is. In your notes, the first is this: biblical faith is confidence in God and his promises. Biblical faith is having confidence in God and his promises. We looked at this verse, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you have friends, if you have loved ones, extended family who are outside of Christ, they've never given their lives to Christ, one of the most important things you could do is pray for their discontentment. Let me explain why I say that. Some of you are hoping for a better marriage. Why are you hoping for a better marriage? Because you're discontented with the marriage you're in the way it is now, and you're wanting it to get better. Some of you are discontented with being single, and so you hope to one day get married. And so you're hoping to get married because you're discontented with being single. Some of you, you want a raise, and you're hoping that the next time that raises are given out that you're going to get a raise. Why? Because you're discontented with your salary now. And so now, if you accepted Christ at 6 and were baptized at 7, this isn't going to maybe apply to you as much. But if you came to know Christ later on in life, do you know what it was that brought you to Christ? Discontentment. You were discontented with your life the way it was. There was something that was missing, and maybe you looked for that fulfillment in the things of the world. Maybe you chased after the lust and the riches and the things of this world, but they always came up empty. And then somewhere along the line, man, some spiritual blinders were lifted. You came to understand God's love and his grace, and by faith you turned to him, and you found that abundant life that God promises us. Well, how did that come? That came about by the fact that you were discontented, you hoped for something better, and you discovered that your hope could be fulfilled. You were certain of God's promises, that when he promised that he would come in and not only save us, but transform us and make us alive. You put your hope and your faith in God, and everything changed. And then we learn to live by faith, confident that God will continue to do what he promises. Let me say this. I believe, because this issue of faith is so important, we really need to get honest about it. I believe that most Christians have more faith in their car than they do in God. Let me explain what I mean. Before you came to church today, how many of y'all crawled underneath your car to make sure that the brake line wasn't busted and you lost all the brake fluid last night? Anybody? Anybody pop your hood and check the brake gauge to make sure it was still full of fluid or not? No, why? Because when you got in your car, you cranked it up and you went, you had confidence that the brake was going to stop when you hit the pedal. It was unseen. You didn't go in there and inspect it. It was just a confidence that it was going to happen. If you press the pedal, the car is going to stop. Now that works, except when we lived in Birmingham, before we came to Orlando, our family, we lived on Shades Mountain in Hoover. Now, we lived on Shades Mountain, and let me say, we lived on Shades Crest Road on Shades Mountain. We lived at the top of the mountain. When you drove Shades Crest Road, you could see the top of our house off to the right if you were going. And because there was a road on the side of our house, you drive down that road to get into our driveway. It was a great road whenever it snowed, man. It was the best sled run in Hoover, right? And I lived on Shades Mountain. I worked at Green Valley. Just to give you an idea, there were times I left home, it was snowing, I got to church, it was raining. I mean, so we're up there a little bit. And one Saturday, I got up and I changed my brakes. I didn't think much about it after I finished changing my brakes. I went in, I washed my hands and hanging around. And Gina asked me a little bit later, would you go to the store and get something? Sure, no problem. I go get in my car, crank it up, back out of the driveway. The road is about like this. I hit the road and I go to press my brakes. Guess what happened? Nothing. Why? Because I forgot to pump the brakes and to get the fluid back in the brake lines. So I've now backed out. I go to hit the brakes. Nothing happened. Well, something does happen. I start picking up speed, okay? Going backwards. And I know, man, about a quarter of a mile down there, there's a sharp turn to the left, and there's a house there. And I'm picking up speed fast. Finally, I didn't know, because you freak out. All I really need to do is pump the brakes. I probably would have stopped on time, but I was freaking out. And so about the time I got 35 miles an hour, I knew I just had to take one for the team. So I just cut the wheel and went into the woods. I mean, I can remember hitting the curb and feeling the bump and thinking, there goes the tires. And as soon as I hopped over it, man, it bottomed out and I'm sliding. I kid you not. I stopped between two huge pine trees. I had to roll the window down to get out of my car because I couldn't open the door, but not a scratch on my car. I don't know how in the world, right? Went and got my friends. We pulled it out, the whole deal. But I learned after that, I didn't trust the car as much next time I got into it, right? I started to pump the brakes, make sure I had it, because here's what we need to understand. Your faith is only as good as the object you put your faith in. And yet we will totally trust a car to stop us when we hit the brakes. What would happen if you had that kind of trust in God? What would happen if you truly believed that God kept his promises? So whenever God says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. The next time that you're really struggling, would you maybe go to God a little bit quicker? Maybe would you trust him a little bit more? When God says, confess your sins, and I'll forgive you your sins and cast them as far as the east is from the west, and do you really believe that God's totally forgiven you? And that or do you still walk around in guilt? Because even though we confess our sins, many of us, we still walk around in guilt, and we don't trust that God has kept his promise, that he's really wiped the slate clean. How many of us really believe that God's plan and his design is to give us an abundant life? Do we really believe that? If we did, we would trust him more. We would walk in faith more. Well, biblical faith says, I trust in God and his promises. Secondly, biblical faith says that I am trusting God enough to do what he says. Look at John 13:17. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you what? Do them. Biblical faith is trusting God enough to do what he says. We looked at Hebrews chapter 11. I want you to read the rest of that chapter sometime this week, because what that whole chapter is about, it's an example of biblical faith. In fact, God gives us 18 examples of biblical faith. It's stuff like this. Noah had so much faith that God said, you know that desert you're living in, Noah? Build an ark. Build a boat in the middle of that desert. And what did Noah do? He built the boat. He didn't argue with God. He didn't tell God, well, God, it's never rained. And God, I'm so far. God, how in the world No, he just did what God told him to do. You go down that list. It says by faith, when God told Abraham, take your family and leave, Abraham left. By faith, when God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, and sacrifice him on Mount Moriah, that Abraham was going up, was on top of the mountain, had built the altar, and was about to sacrifice his son, even though it made no sense whatsoever, because this was the promised son that Israel was going to come through. But by faith, Abraham was going to obey God even when it didn't make sense. By faith, as you keep reading, Moses' parents hid him in the river. By faith, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea on dry land. And when we really, biblical faith is trusting God to do what he says. So the flip side of that is if we don't obey, then we really don't have biblical faith and we won't please God. Now, when it comes to your spiritual condition, maybe the most important way to evaluate it is how obedient are you to those verses that you don't agree with? We're in church, we can be honest, right? I mean, if I were to rewrite the Bible, there's some verses I'd leave out, all right? First of all, there's some verses that are tough to understand. But secondly, there's some verses that I just wish weren't in there. I mean, every once in a while, it'd be good to get even with somebody, right? I mean, in fact, I'm not even going to tell you the verses that I would want to keep out because that's too much information. I just don't want you to know that. But here's the deal. If I want to evaluate what my spiritual condition is, it's not by evaluating how well am I obeying those verses I agree with. That's easy. It's how well am I obeying those verses I kind of wish weren't in there. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us, boy, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. If you keep going to verse 7, it also says this. And by the way, don't be wise in your own eyes. Here's what I've discovered. If God and I disagree on something, he's usually right. And I just need to walk in obedience. By the way, he's always right. All right. I just need to walk. I see some people going, what do you mean, usually? No, he's always right, okay? Thirdly, biblical faith doesn't just believe in God. Biblical faith believes God. Look what it says, James 2:19, you believe that there is one God. Good, even the demons believe that and shudder. Most people in our culture today who believe they're going to heaven, they base it on two things. Number one, I'm a good person. We've already seen you can't be good enough. It's only through faith and by God's grace, right? And secondly, well, I believe in God. Well, you're in the company of the demons when you believe in God, right? I mean, that's what James reminds us here. It's not enough to believe in God. We have to believe God, which means that we walk in obedience, which means we trust his promises. There's a whole difference between believing in God and believing God enough to walk in faith. Now, let me straighten something up or just address this because I know that people have kind of looked at this and said, isn't there a conflict there? We read Ephesians 2, 8, 9 that says, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith, not of works, so you don't get the glory, right? So it's by grace you've been saved through faith. But if you get to James 2:20, here's what James 2:20 says. You say you have faith, show me your works. And people look at those and go, man, isn't there a conflict there? Well, there's not when you understand the context. Here's what's happening. Paul is saying, look, there's only one way to be saved, and that's through putting your faith in Christ and letting his grace save you. But then here's what James is saying. James is over here saying, and by the way, do you want to know if you really did that? There will be things in your life that prove evidence that you really put your faith in Christ. Because there will be works that will follow your salvation. Why? Because you're walking in faith. You're trusting God enough to do what he says for you to do. And so what James is saying is you want affirmation of your faith? Look at your life. Are you living it out? Are you doing what God told you to do? Sometimes the best way to know what something is to talk about what it's not. So real quick in your notes, what biblical faith is not. Number one, biblical faith is not the absence of doubt. It's not the absence of doubt. Remember, it's trusting God enough to do what he says. Let me ask you, can you trust someone to do what they say and still have some doubt? Absolutely. Let me give you an example. I was about 9 years old. My dad and I are outside playing ball. The ball goes up on the roof. My dad lifts me up. I get up on the roof. I get the ball. I toss it down. Now it's time to come down off of the roof. My dad says, just jump and I'll catch you. Now, let me give a little disclosure. My dad was 6'7". I didn't have that far to jump, all right? And I know you're looking at me, you're saying your dad was 6'7". Yes, my mother was 4'11". I was raised by a circus act. I'm just telling you, okay? So my dad said jump. Now, did I have some doubt about jumping? Absolutely, because that still looked like a long way down to jump to my dad. But I didn't want to spend the night on the roof. And so even though I had doubt, I still had enough faith to do what he told me to do. And I jumped, and he caught me, and everything was hunky-dory, all right? So here's the deal. Biblical faith is not the absence of doubt. In fact, here's what I would say. The greatest faith is when you act in the midst of doubt. Even though there is doubt, you're saying, and yet God is leading me to do this, so I'm going to do it, even though it doesn't make sense, or even though I'm scared to death, or even though I would do it differently, I'm going to obey. Next, biblical faith is not believing in a set of facts about Jesus. We looked at that. Even the demons believe in a set of facts about Jesus. And we've got to be very cautious when we share our faith with others. When it comes to evangelism, we don't want people just to agree with facts about God and think they're saved. You see, Jesus never once said, come and believe in me. What Jesus said was, come and follow me. That it requires our life of trusting him and walking in obedience to him. Thirdly, biblical faith is not a powerful force that manipulates God. This is where people say, man, if you can think it, you can be it. If you have enough faith, you can name it, you can claim it. If you have enough faith, nothing bad will ever happen to you. If something bad happens to you, it's only because you don't have enough faith. To which I always point to Paul. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. We don't know exactly what it is. You know, many people believe and speculate it was some kind of physical ailment. Maybe he was losing his eyesight, or maybe it was something else, but he had some kind of thorn in the flesh. Personally, my theory is that Paul had been married and that his wife died and his mother-in-law came and moved in with him. That was the thorn in the flesh that I feel like, but I can't prove it, okay? That's just a theory that I have. But whatever it was, Paul had a thorn in the flesh. Did Paul ask God to remove the thorn? Absolutely. Would we say Paul understood biblical faith? Yeah, he wrote the book on it, all right? And Paul had all the biblical faith in the world, and he said, God, remove this thorn from me. What did God say? No. God said, I ain't taking it away. God said, you're going to learn that my grace is sufficient during these times and to take care of whatever that thorn in the flesh was. So some people say, man, if you just have enough faith, nothing bad will ever happen. That's not true. Biblical faith doesn't mean that nothing bad will ever happen. Just biblical faith means that as we walk in obedience, God will see us through all of those things. He'll walk with us through the valley of the shadow of death. And then lastly, biblical faith is not believing the unbelievable. I have some people I know that they think, man, the most bizarre and outrageous thing they could think, that just proves that, you know, that they have faith in God, and they believe some of the most weird stuff. In fact, I'm just going to tell you right now, you can have all the faith in the world, and the Magic still aren't going to make it in the playoffs, all right? It's just not going to happen. Biblical faith is not a blind faith. It's not a blind optimism. I can remember growing up and hearing the story, first of all, of Jesus calling his first apostles and thinking, man, what would it be like to come in off of fishing all night? Jesus comes, says, drop your nets, come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And these guys actually left. I thought, how crazy is that? I mean, and then as I got older, I came to understand, you know what? Jesus already had a reputation. Jesus had already healed and done miracles. Jesus had already taught, and people knew who Jesus was. So when he came and he called those first disciples, it wasn't a blind optimism. It wasn't a blind leap in the dark. It was an informed faith. And here's what you need to know. When God asks you to step out in faith, it'll be clear and he will have prepared you for what it is that he's calling you to do. But when he calls, the question is, am I going to have faith and walk in obedience? So as we close, again, we're going to build on this all week, but man, the most important question is this: what is saving faith? Well, we've already looked at it some, but it's this: just trusting Jesus enough to follow him. It's not being baptized, it's not joining a church, it's not being in a small group, it's not giving of your tithes, and all of those things are good, but that's not what saving faith is. It's trusting Jesus enough to follow him. Look at what it says. We know that we have come to know him if we obey his commands. The man who says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But if anyone obeys his word, God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. See, the kind of faith that makes you right with God is a faith that says, God, not only do I believe in you, but I believe you. I believe your promises, and I believe that you have a better plan for my life than I could ever come up with. And it's out of my discontentment that I put my hope in you. And it's a confident hope. And not only do I want to know you, but I want to live following you from this day forward. That's why our first 30-day challenge this year was to be in the Gospels and read the Gospels for 30 days. But our challenge wasn't necessarily read the Gospel. Our challenge was to live according to God's word. Because that's an affirmation that I truly have put my faith in Christ. Let's bow our heads as Jason comes and extends the response time.
Hi, I'm Jason Smith, the campus pastor for our Lakeside campus, First Baptist Church, Windermere. If you've been touched by this morning's message, or if you would like to talk to a pastor or have more information about the church, please contact us at our website at www.fbcwindermere.com, or please feel free to call us at 407-876-2234. Thank you, and may God bless you.